Good evening, everyone. My name is Genaro Gonzalez. I'm currently the Texas chapter treasurer. I'm very pleased to be here with you this evening to introduce tonight's group, Mr. Mark Ford and University of North Texas Steel Band. Their session this evening is entitled Educational and Musical Benefits of the Steel Drum Band. I'd like to acknowledge the sponsors for this event, the Texas chapter of the Percussive Arts Society, also the University of North Texas. I'd also like to invite you tomorrow to stop by the Percussive Arts Society booth, which is booth number 9132. If you'd like more information about the Percussive Arts Society, we're currently featuring a free 90-day trial membership to the Percussive Arts Society. If you'd like to log on, www.pas.org, and receive your free 90-day trial membership to the Percussive Arts Society. I'd also like to announce we're having a business meeting of the Texas chapter of the Percussive Arts Society tomorrow afternoon at 12:30. That will be downstairs in room 102, so we invite all of you to attend that meeting. I'd like to tell you just a little bit about Mark Ford and our group for this evening. Mark Ford is currently a coordinator of percussion activities at the University of North Texas in Denton. A marimba specialist, Mark has premiered a variety of new works for solo marimba and regularly performs concerts and clinics around the country. He has been featured as a clinician and performer at various music conventions. Mark began playing steel drums in 1982 and has performed on a variety of steel band CDs. At the Percussive Arts Society International Convention held in Dallas in 2000, Mark was one of the featured soloists with the Texas Mass Steel Band Ensemble. As a composer, Mark has written several popular works for solo marimba, steel drum band, and percussion ensembles. His compositions have been performed at universities and concert halls throughout the world. Mark's latest marimba CD, which is entitled Motion Beyond, was recently released to excellent reviews by ARU 2000. Mark serves on the executive board of the Percussive Arts Society as the president-elect. He also represents the Pearl Adams Corporation of America, the Wilson Cymbal Company, and Innovative Percussion as a performing artist and clinician. The UNT 2 O'Clock Steel Drum Band, directed by Mark Ford, is a select performing ensemble of the University of North Texas College of Music, featuring steel drums, instruments which are made out of 55-gallon oil drums. The UNT Steel Band has performed throughout the Midwest and at music conventions such as the Percussive Arts Society International Convention and the Texas Music Educators Conference. The 2001 Steel Band performed at the annual Summer UNT Music Festival held in Crested Butte, Colorado. The 25-member Steel Band has performed with a variety of guest artists, including Andy Norell, as well as the Dallas Symphony Orchestra. In 1999, the UNT Steel Drum Band released a CD of panorama calypso music and classical transcriptions. This CD is also available from Drop 6 Media, as well as from the UNT College of Music. Please help me welcome this evening's clinician, Mark Ford and the University of North Texas Steel Band.
the beginning or a short excerpt of Pan in A minor, which we're going to play in its entirety at the end of our clinic here today. But I wanted to kind of get started off with a bang here. I want to thank Genaro Gonzalez for that nice introduction, and also want to thank my sponsors that are helping to make this happen. Of course, UNT College of Music, Pearl Adams Corporation, Zildjian, and of course, Innovative Percussion. There are some handouts, and if you didn't get one when you came in, it's not that big of a deal. My whole premise on handouts is that in order for it to be beneficial to you when you go off to your world, that you have something that can lead you in the right direction regarding questions you might have of something that we talk about today or something that we perform. So what I tried to do with the handout was, of course, give you an example here of the music that we're playing, but also to give you resources. And I tried to keep it web-based, because it's so easy now regarding with the web, is I tried to go to a variety of sources that might deal with history of Pan, sheet music of Pan, being able performance techniques, etc., to give you some resources when you get home. You can check these things out. Please keep in mind that one website may do several things, and I've tried to keep it balanced. So, for example, if you went to the panyard.com, see, if you were looking for music, of course, they also have instruments. Likewise, they also have a short little page about history, but maybe I thought another page was maybe a little bit more descriptive. So again, the handout is really for you to use after you leave and not so much during the clinic today. I want to talk a little bit about this phenomenon. As Gigi mentioned, I started playing pans in 1982. I was a graduate student at the University of North Texas. And in 1982, there wasn't that many people playing steel drums in the university settings. And in fact, we played with Andy Norrell at the PASIC in Dallas. And of all the people, unfortunately, the drums that I was playing was double guitar pans, which are some of the middle range pans that I'll show you in a little bit. But my drums didn't come in until like the Wednesday before PASIC, okay? It was like the Tuesday before. So I was always like on the marimba in the back going, this doesn't feel quite right, you know. But I learned the notes and started playing, and this phenomenon, either in North Texas and across the country, really started to take off. And I've played a great bit in regards to smaller ensembles as well as large ensembles. And bringing this type of opportunity for these students to get a chance to play for you has really been a goal of mine since I came to North Texas, and I want to thank you for coming. This is, I want to talk a little bit about the origins of these instruments. It's a pretty, very brief explanation of the history. These instruments originated in the island of Trinidad and Tobago, which is at the bottom of the Caribbean Ocean, right off the coast of South America. And like the rest of the New World, the slave trade and the colonization from Europe had a major impact on how these drums came together. In as early as 1780s, for example, the slave population and the white population in Trinidad was about equal. And what we see in regards to Pan is a series of British domination on the island, colonial colonization, if you will, versus the culture of African slaves that came over with, of course, their own drums, African drums, and a variety of different kind of music that was, of course, foreign to Europe. And as early as 1880, the British outlawed all African drums. Okay, so they couldn't get together. Why? Because they were using the drums as a source of communication. They used the drums for a source of communion and get together. And when they would get together, there would be riots. And Trinidad was not a pretty place at that time. A lot of violence between gangs. And as early as 1930, the British again actually burnt instruments in the streets. They actually outlawed musical instruments. So if you can imagine a culture of a small island of a very poverty-stricken country with absolutely no release regarding their art form or their heritage. So what happened is that, in a nutshell, is that they started to use what was available. Bamboo was available. They started to come up with these group bands that we call tambour bamboo groups, where you'd have different tubes of bamboo, and you would be able to strike it with another stick of bamboo or also on the ground and get different pitches depending on the length of the bamboo. Unfortunately, you could also put machetes inside the bamboo, and you'd get close to the next tribe and have some violence and bloodshed. So the British actually started to outlaw all of these instruments. And in about 1941, 1940, 39, in that area, we start to see convex pans. Pans that were actually upside down, opposite of this, and they were bowed out. And in 1941, Elie Minette, who made some of the drums up here today, was able to actually sink a 40-gallon oil drum this way in a traditional manner and actually start the origins of what we might consider the modern-day steel drum instrument. The steel drums are a pretty fascinating instrument because it's the only acoustical family of instruments. Think about this now. The only family of acoustic instruments developed in the 20th century. The only one. Now, there's been a lot of electronic advancements and other acoustic instruments that were developed, but not a family of instruments, not like saxophone family or clarinet where you have soprano voice down to bass. All of these drums are based on 55-gallon oil barrels, and they have a variety of pitches. The lead pans have up to 26 pitches, which are 2.5 octaves, and you'll be able to see that on the handout if you haven't gotten a chance to get one yet. What happened in the United States is that these drums slowly began to come into the country in the 60s and 70s. And there was a major band that went from Trinidad into England and Europe, actually, in the 50s. And what happened is that universities started to get interested. And a gentleman named Al O'Connor, who still teaches at the University of Northern Illinois, was instrumental in starting the whole steel band program in the United States. In 1973, he brought steel drums to Northern Illinois University, which is in DeKalb, Illinois. Because of his interest and success there, is that University of Illinois, right down the street, was interested, and they brought Al in, and he established a band at the University of Illinois. Then Larry Snyder at University of Akron in 1980, just a few years later, got Al to come down, and he established a band there. So Al is like going out all throughout Illinois, establishing bands in Ohio. Came down to Wichita State University in 1981 and started a band there as well. In 1982, this band was established, this is its 20th year, which is pretty incredible for steel drums in the United States. And that was the band I was telling you about a little while ago. That was in the first performance with that band. And Robert Chitroma was teaching percussion at the time in North Texas, and he started this group primarily with the help of bands from Cliff Alexis at Northern Illinois, as well as Ellie Minette, who is now at West Virginia University. So on this little handout here, I also list, it says early steel drum bands, and those, the ones I've mentioned, are primarily the beginning stages. Now, almost, you go to every state, there's at least 2 or 3 steel bands in every state at the college level, much less in Texas, where you have, probably, I don't know how many high school steel drum bands there would be, but a lot. West Virginia University, as you can see on this list, says 1992, and that's a lot later, doesn't seem very early, but really West Virginia and Northern Illinois continue to be really a dominant force in steel drum in the United States. Why? Because they have 2 of the most prestigious builders. Cliff Alexis at Northern Illinois, both from Trinidad, and Ellie Minette, as I mentioned earlier, basically the godfather of the steel drum, is now in residence at University of West Virginia. So those two are centers in the States here for steel drum performance. The music that you just heard just a minute ago is a calypso version of a tune called Pan in A minor. And most of the music we think about at Trinidad, we think about it as playing on steel drums, but really, these people sing. The whole idea about vocalization and music is very natural to Trinidadians. And the fact that they can play steel drums is that most often they will take popular tunes that are vocal tunes and then turn them into what they may call a panorama chart or a contest tune that they would be able to go to contest. And we'll talk a little bit more about contest in a minute, but this first tune that they're going to play for you here in its entirety is a tune called Jump for Joy. And this was originally a vocal tune that was actually written for a contest and with a longer, about a 12-minute composition for a panorama contest. This is actually a much shorter version that Shelley Irvin put together at Panyard, and it's called Jump for Joy. Boy, it'd be a lot better if they really enjoyed what they were doing, you know. Actually, you know, that's one of the serious motivations about people playing steel drums. And I know that, again, when I first started playing for the first time, it was just a lot of fun. And percussionists tend to spend their time in a lot of different ways. We have to learn all the keyboard stuff, we have to learn all the drum stuff, and all the symphonic literature, and all the hand drumming things, and at least this is what we think we're supposed to do, and on and on. And steel drums, it's just like, to us, it's another instrument. You know, well, what do we do now? Oh, we're going to play steel drum now. But really, in a lot of ways, the steel drum is much more accessible to the general public in many ways than, say, a percussion ensemble would be. Why? It's hard to play the blues on the steel drum. I mean, it's a very happy sound, it's a very lighthearted sound, but also, you can do some sophistication. And the sophistication comes from balance and blend. Now, this room is a serious challenge when it comes to balance and blend. So we're going for the Guinness World Book of Records for how many drums and people we can put in one room here. But what I wanted to do right now is basically introduce those of you. Well, first off, how many of you have played steel drums before? Well, that's incredible. How many of you have steel drums? Bobby's back there going, I think I have. How many of you guys play steel drums now? Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. What I want to do now is, for everybody else, is to basically describe these instruments a little bit for you and tell you a little bit about how they're made and let each one of these groups of instruments do a little demonstration for you. So, Michelle, if you could hold up your drum for them just so they can see. These drums in the front are lead pans or soprano pans. In the beginning, many times they were called ping-pongs because these drums are actually not chromatic but diatonic. These drums here are fully chromatic from middle C up to G, 2.5 octaves above. And they're worked off in a spiderweb type of fashion. It's kind of like, you know, music for dyslexic people. All the notes are kind of mixed up basically, but they generally run in a cycle of fifths with most builders nowadays. These pans play the melody. They rarely do anything like accompanying or playing a comping. They can often play in divisi and play harmony parts, but primarily they play the lead parts, and you can improvise and solo on these drums. So they're going to play a small section of Pan in A minor for you. That fall right underneath them are called double tenor pans, and they're represented by these three folks right here. Playing on two drums, their range actually goes lower than the lead pan, but actually almost goes, well, depending on the builder, because these ranges will vary depending on who you get your drums from. So if you buy a drum from panyard.com, their range will be a little different than LM&S pans. It will be a little different than another builder's. But these drums typically go a little bit lower than your lead pan and almost go as high, but the high range is very thin. So what I've chosen here is a section of a tune we're going to play later on that kind of shows you a little bit of the high register of these drums as well as the low register. Right below them are the double second pans, which actually in many ways are probably one of the most popular sets of steel drums that you can play because they're incredibly soloistic. You can accompany yourself, you can play lead lines, They're just probably one of the most versatile sets of hands. Depending on the builder, sometimes their tone can be very bright, sometimes it can be very mellow and dark. What we have here is 4 sets, 1 set in the back and 3 sets here, and they're going to play a selection. Now their range also, again, moves into, actually all the way up a little bit into the lead pan range, and again, lower than the double tenors. But what's most significant here is their ability to blend and to strum harmonically. So they're gonna do a couple of examples. This first one is a short excerpt from a work by Gustav Holst, and this will show you a little bit about their ability. 1, 2, notice here, the challenge here with the players that play the double pans is obviously flexibility to get back and forth between the drums, but also not to play the drums as they're just rhythm instruments, that they really have a sense of phrase and a sense of line, okay? And God knows that we want drummers to play with a sense of line, okay? That's a good thing. Back behind us here we have a variety of instruments. Primarily what we have are cello pans and guitar pans. Now, if you play in a band that has a traditional cello, a cello is a lot like a guitar pan. This is what Adam is playing right here. Adam, can you hold one of these so you can see? And drum roll, please. Okay, great. Great. Okay. So here again, with only about 12 notes per drum here, and he's playing across the line with 3 drums, basically moving in a chromatic fashion upwards. And these drums are very punchy. The cellos traditionally have the same exact pattern as that, except their skirt range or the side of the drum is another third longer, so it's much deeper, fuller sound, but again, the exact same notes. As an arranger, these drums offer a couple of different opportunities for you. Thank you, Adam. They offer a couple of different things because the guitars will be very punchy and rhythmic, and the cellos will tend to be much more mellow, like the double seconds, and much more easier instrument to blend. So what we have is actually what we consider 4 cellos, 4 guitars, but they're actually terming cellos in the back of these 4 drums that James and Angélica are playing in the back, and their arrangement on the drums is different. And they play a much lower note, almost like a tenor bass note. And then we have this mix that Nate is playing called a quadraphonic, which is actually a mix of a double second and a cello range. They're going to play a selection for you as a unit with all these drums from pan and A minor. But not least, of course, our bass players in the back. Why are they last but not least? Probably the most popular. I'm not going to answer that. You want to pick one up? Why not? You know? These drums only have 3 pitches each. They're a full barrel length, that's a full 55-gallon barrel, and they are playing 6 of those drums, okay? And they basically have a range of a little more than an octave and a fifth. They're going to play the same selection in pan and A minor that you just heard in the mid-range drums, and we get a chance to hear what they do. Yeah. they have the most fun, you know. It's unfortunate that we're sitting so close and so low because there are a lot of things that you can do with steel drums that are visual and actually help to emulate the music and not take away from it. And we tend to do a good bit as we move forward through this program. So if you feel like you want to get up or just dance, that's fine too. You're welcome to. Now, a lot of what's happened a lot with percussion ensembles lately is they'll have a traditional percussion ensemble and then they'll bring in like maybe 2 lead hands and a double second and a double tenor to help reinforce the ensemble. Maybe they're looking for quote Latin sound or a Caribbean type sound. Maybe they're actually, the actual publisher calls for it. There are some publishers now that are writing charts that write completely for steel drums and then they give you all substitutions. So therefore, if you don't have all of these drums, you could do this with 2 lead pans and just a few of the others, and marimba and vibraphone and bells. Publishers that are doing that are Drop 6 Media, malletworks.com. These companies have been very successful with that. And in many ways, a true blending of this sound is probably how this art form is going to continue to grow. What I've done with this next tune, this next chart is one of my compositions, and I did this same concept but yet in reverse. I wanted to have a full steel drum band, but I wanted to take some marimba and percussion sounds and insert them into the steel drum band to mix the layers that way. So I ended up coming up with, in this case, 4 players that play marimba off and on throughout this tune to kind of give it this woody, smooth character in the middle line, and that would compare timbres with the lead in the bass line. This next chart here is it's a new one. It's just being published again by Drop Media. And again, it's a very unique application because the whole thing can be done with percussion ensemble as well, although I conceived it this way. The title came not from me, came from my, at the time, 8-year-old son, who over a bowl of Cheerios, I asked him, I said, so what do you think I should name this tune? And he looked right at me, and I was expecting something like Power Rangers or whatnot. He went, call it Night Watch. And I went, oh, okay. So, this is Night Watch. Thank you very much. The point of using this piece today on this program is really a lot of times people will ask me, well, where do you start with steel drums? I mean, I don't have all this money, and right now, if you were going to get a package, most of the packages basically start about $8,000 to $12,000, depending on the builder, and that's a lot of money. However, you can get 1 or 2 drums and start to incorporate that into a percussion ensemble. Again, companies like Roloff have tunes that also publish Latin type selections that could feature a steel drum with inside a percussion ensemble and just a soloist. So you can start to use it as less as a novelty, because I think it used to be kind of a novelty. Maybe it is to those of you that aren't around it, but we're around it all the time, and we feel like this is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. We've been doing it in North Texas for 20 years. But we think that now it's a tool, and it's a tool for expression, it's a tool for music, and just like if I'm going to try to, if I've got a Phillips screw and I have a straight screwdriver, I have the wrong tool. For steel drums, this gives me an opportunity to try a different tool to see if I can make that tune more expressive, or if I can utilize a certain player to his or her strengths, if they can improvise or whatnot. A lot of these drums, I wanted to talk about the functions of them as well as we work in here. And strumming is a term that you hear a lot in regards to steel drum pan. And again, strumming comes from the same concept as a guitar strumming chords in a tune. And some of these drums are typical in regards to strumming, and some are much more melodic oriented. For example, the double seconds and the guitar pans do a lot of strumming in the tune that you just heard, and I've asked them to play for you just a short section of it, just so you can get a sense of some of their inner workings. Typically, strumming patterns are very syncopated and very repetitious. Actually, what you'll hear in the whole section, strumming, and then the double seconds will actually play a counter melody right at the very end. That's what we hope will happen, right? Most players, if you hand them, I have a seventh grader in my house who's starting band. Now he's been around drums a lot, but I go and work with their band a lot in Denton, and I know what it's like going back to those individuals who want to play drums. They feel it in their heart, and everybody else hears it, of course. But they've got a drum here, and they start to play it, and it's all about rhythms and it's all about counting. And unfortunately, if you can think about it, what it'd be like if you guys, those of you who are non-drummers. For us in the back of the room in beginning band, the teacher's talking about pitch, he's talking about tone, he's talking about intonation, matching pitches. The players are doing things with their sound, they're crafting sound. The trumpet players trying to match the pitch, etc., etc. What are the drummers doing? Okay, the drummers learn how to hold the sticks in the stroke, and if they can count to 4, they're in. Okay, we're good. Okay. So no one, very rarely in the beginning band looks over and says, "So, how's that snare drum blending with the clarinets today?" They don't hear the word blend. Actually, all they hear is too loud or too soft or too loud. That's it. Okay. With steel drums, you can bring that same mentality to the steel drum. In other words, we can play the steel drum and play the rhythms and notes and basically bang it out. Okay. However, sometimes music does do that, but most often not. Music has to be played in a sense of phrase, in a sense of push and release, and a sense of relaxation at the end of the phrase. And what we tried to do, and I think what you just heard in the double seconds and the guitar pans, is that, they were strumming, but yet there was still a sense of line to the strumming. They weren't just banging out the rhythms, hopefully. Okay, likewise, when you play a melodic instrument, you want to do that same kind of thing. Now, drummers don't breathe. Okay, well, at least they're supposed to breathe. Okay, so they're supposed to breathe, okay? But the problem is that they can play their instrument without breathing, all right? And you all know this. If you're going to sing, you get to the end of the phrase, and I'm not going to sing for you. No, I'll do better. No pun intended. Anyway, is that you would have to breathe to make the next phrase happen. Okay, likewise, if you're playing horn or if you're playing violin, you're going to pick the bow up before or when you change direction on the bow. There's going to be an articulation change. However, with drummers, it's like, till the cows come home, we don't have to necessarily do that, okay? So this is what it gets down to the people who listen to percussion skill. Oh, they're musical. Well, they're not really doing anything technically different than the other people, except they're breathing. They're hearing the phrase, and they're trying to emulate what the clarinets, what the trumpets, what the violins are doing. What we tried to do here is, again, just play a sample of the tune we just played. Again, a short melodic line with a sense of lift and hopefully a relaxation at the end of the phrase. Okay? Challenging for on this is actually the bass player, okay? Because what does the bass player have? Boom, ding, dum, boom, ding, dum. It's the same thing for 4 bars, then change to the 5 chord for 4 bars, So there's no sense of line in his part, okay? And I had only one bass player play here before, because again, the percussionist has to be able to hear the line and be able to support it no matter what part they're playing in, okay? Oftentimes, the music may be contradictory to that, well then therefore, play what's on the page. But most of the time, I'd say 85% of the time, what's going through the band is supporting whatever instrument has the melody or the most interesting line. Now, a lot of times in Trinidad, for example, at these competitions that they have yearly, they'll have a major calypso competition, and that's where our Panamanian minor is going to come in at the end of our presentation. But they also have classical competitions, and if you can imagine, steel drum bands, not just of 25 players like we have here, but bands of 100, playing the music of Beethoven, of Bartok, of Stravinsky, okay, and basically learning it from root, okay, in each sections and then putting it together. This is, for school bands in the United States, this is an incredible way for us to offer an insight into classical music that they normally wouldn't get to play. Let's face it, how many players really get to play in orchestra at school? I mean, we may have a section of 4 or 5. In North Texas, we have maybe 5 or 6 players that are in the orchestra. That means there's a whole lot of people that don't have that opportunity, whether they want it or not, and they need to have that exposure. This particular next tune is a movement of the St. Paul Suite from Gustav Holst. And I've chosen this music for a couple different reasons. Eric Martin is one of our arrangers. Here's Eric right here. This is a great opportunity. Eric, having a student arrange a piece, and that's what we're going to do in the next couple of charts, it gives the students a great opportunity to not only test their arranging skills, but also stretch their wings a little bit in regards of literature. This particular tune is very indicative of Holst's band music, his suites for band, and it also features a wide variety of steel drumming without percussion, without the drum set and the accessory percussion in the back. So this is the jig from the St. Paul Suite. Want to take a moment to introduce the folks in the engine room, or in the percussion sections, we might say. In Trinidad, this is the engine room. And again, in percussion now, remember, if they're playing on bamboo and tin cans and oil pans and 40-gallon oil barrels from the American oil trade down there, they surely didn't have, pearl drum sets to play on. So what they would start to do is start to have a combination of rhythms that started to happen originally, and how we've adapted them in the States traditionally. Right now, in an engine room, even in Trinidad, would primarily compose of a brake drum or an iron. Okay, an iron is basically a brake drum off of an old automobile. Okay, and Shawn is our brake drum player. He's going to hold that up and show it to you. At least I think he is. Good. What rust is original. We didn't do that on purpose. No. So what these would happen here when these drums used to be marching. When these drums all were marched, and they would wrap the pans with straps around their necks, these guys in the back would be holding up the brake drums and playing. It was a marching instrument. It was a moving instrument. Now, what happens is they go deaf in the left ear, number one. Okay, but nowadays we traditionally put it on a snare drum stand, and he plays it with snare drum sticks. And the rhythm is not complicated, but it's integral to this style of calypso and soca music. Okay, soca to calypso is kind of like blues to jazz in many ways, and there's a lot of different varieties. I'm not going to go into that right now. But again, there are some leads for you in the handout that can help you to understand that a little bit better. But just play your basic pattern on the brake drums. Lovely. Okay, so he's been practicing that for weeks. No, when you combine that with the drum set, now the drum set will be actually start to imitate a large bass drum type sounding drum, as well as shakers, and initially emphasis of other instruments like the tambour bamboo type rhythms. And he would put a beat to it that would complement the soca rhythm or calypso rhythm on the irons. We're also using a set of congas back here, which are basically Cuban drums. But again, African skin drums were indigenous to the slave trade that came there. And these drums are not not these particular kinds of drums, but drums like this. And so when we put these three guys together in a type of a calypso fashion that you're going to play like in Pan and A minor, it sounds like this. Again, now what you're hearing is a year 2002 rendition of what we are considering might be traditional music. And in all things, music evolves, music changes, doesn't stay the same all the time. And although we like to think of it as that we're going to play Beethoven like Beethoven meant it, I'm not so certain Beethoven would agree. That I think he would say the same thing, that my music's going to change depending on who's playing it, and who's interpreting it, and what the time period and how it's relative to the audience. Likewise here, if you're going to have something that's relative to the audience, you're going to have music that is that they can associate with. And that's a great avenue for you to take regarding pop music with steel bands. Pop music or popular music, rock music, whatever you want, jazz music, some type of music that the audience can relate to helps to bring the audience into the sound, helps them to understand the type of music that you're playing, and also can hopefully give you a base from which to move on to other genres, maybe like the traditional panorama charts or the classical music. What we've done here is that Nathan Ratliff and Shawn Redman here combined efforts to arrange things. Every little thing she does is magic. So we thought we'd play that for you. Thank you very much. I have down in my notes here to talk about resources, and I looked at that just a second ago, and I said, well, of course I meant pan resources and about steel drums, but I'm looking out through the crowd here, and you know, school programs, school bands, their resources are their students, you know, and I see a lot of you in the audience here that have actually played in this band before that help the group to grow one at a time. You know, we've got folks like Lalo Davila and Steve McDonald and Mike Hernandez back there in the back, and probably a bunch others that I'm not going to try to do all the names on, but this type of heritage helps you to build a program and creates an incredible amount of energy because you start to feed off of ideas of one another. And there's absolutely no way that one person makes all this happen. We put things in motion, we talk about it. As you can see, we utilize student arrangers. We have guest artists that come in and play with the group. And we basically know that we don't have all the answers. So we just keep asking questions till we get it right, you know. And that's how we grow and that's how we learn. And when we're expressive that way and we can connect with an audience, then by all means, that's what it's all about. I mean, it's about having fun. And this band is about having fun. And when you have a steel band in your program or you just start to introduce drums into your program, you'll find that they're an incredibly popular instrument because they're fun. Okay? And you can approach it in a very musical and educational, beneficial way that I think will help your students as you move forward. We have one more tune to play for you, but I'd be happy to take a few questions if you'd like, if there's anything out there. Yes?
Yeah, it's about notation. Do they sound in the same octave that they're written in?
Yes.
And you use other traditional percussion notation?
Exactly. Well, primarily this is written just basically on a traditional stage, lead pans on treble clef. They sound, they're non-transposing instruments. The bass is written actually where it sounds, below the staff. Okay. However, this is actually changed as years have gone by. Many pan charts I've played with, there'd be a melody and a counter melody, and then just the chords, you know, and a bass line. And the guys in the middle would just comp the chords. And that's another incredible asset to bring to your students because drummers typically don't have an opportunity to really look at a piece of music and sculpt it. Like if you have just chord symbols, you're actually talking about popular chord symbols that would be used, of course, in any jazz tune, any pop tune. But drummers typically, again, they can count to 4, they're in, you know. If they can read the part and count those rhythms out, and they're doing their thing. But if I tell them to play a G minor 7 chord, you know, then it's like, oh, well, how am I going to voice that? Now, this is a pretty big band, so we actually have to be, you know, have to write it out so we make sure that we're all doing the same thing. But if it's a smaller group, there's a lot of flexibility. And the notation would be exactly the same if it was a jazz band or whatnot. The percussion notation in the back is traditional. Drum set legend and break drum would just be like on a non-clef, a neutral clef zone. Anything else? Yes.
Who tunes your pans?
Darren Dyke has been tuning my pans from Ellie, and he is in, he's basically Ellie Minette in Texas now. Again, I've spoken with him. Ellie's has known him for about 20 years now or so. And again, he built not all these pans, but most of them up here. And Darren was hoping to be here today. And I wanted to introduce him to you because he's a wonderful resource for you because he is in Austin. And there are other builders as well in the Texas area. And again, they're listed on those pan web pages that talk about list of pan builders and whatnot. I've always had Ellie tune my pans. I know a little bit about tuning. I also know a little bit about brain surgery, so I don't do either one. So I try to bring in the right people to do the right job, you know. And for years and years and years, Ellie, I was on the East Coast, and when Ellie was living in Georgia or West Virginia, I would just drive there and take, you know, a couple days of my time and get my drums tuned. And I knew that it was going to be done right because it was Ellie, you know. And that's how I felt because that was my philosophy of. However, I know the people that have Cliff Alexis pans feel exactly the same way about Cliff, and Cliff does an incredible job, and Darren is doing a wonderful job here. So really, I think the key to the answer to your question really is be consistent. If you find the sound that you really like, keep staying with that person because steel drums, unlike, well, as you might know, you tune up a guitar, you know, you play one tune and all of a sudden the guitar is out of tune again. You know, this happens a lot, you know, talk to guitarists. Steel drums are the same way. Remember, we're hitting them with sticks and rubber mallets here, and so the metal's going to give eventually. And so they do need to be tuned. This band is usually tuned once to twice a year, and it can stand to be done more. We're talking about time and money on that front.
Well, you answered one of my questions. The other was how much does it cost per
To
tune?
tune? It kind of depends. Usually what we'll do is sometimes it's like $100 per drum. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's a little less. What this matters is because, remember, these instruments aren't made in a industry. There's no machine line stamping out steel drums. These are individual hand-tuned drums, handcrafted drums. And I know this looks really smooth. It looks like something stamped it out, but a man or a woman with a big hammer banged this pan out and make it this smooth. So it's really a craftsmanship. So it's really thinking about like building a violin. You'd have to have certain skills, of course, and to build a really fine steel drum, you have to have certain skills. So it depends on where he is or she is, his tuning. Because if Ellie is right next, if Ellie was if Ellie was going to be in Dallas, he would come to North Texas a lot cheaper than if I have to bring him all the way from West Virginia, to tune the drums. So sometimes there's other things that move into, but generally with this band, I'll spend anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 per tuning session. And he'll be able to get most of the bugs out, Anything else? Yes.
Talk for a second about the sticks that they use.
Okay.
Variety of woods or...
Well, it's varied. This is a wooden shaft with a rubber tubing like it would be on surgical tubing. Just flipped off and put on top there. Other sticks would be aluminum based. Now these tend to be much more, get a lot more higher frequency out of the drums, a lot more punch to the attack. The wood stick tends to be a little bit more mellow. Traditionally, it was a wooden stick with rubber from basically a rubber tree wrapped around it and stuck in. And often in the beginning, actually, it was just bare wood. Okay, so it was very abrasive drumming type style. And as you go back to the back, Josh, hold up some of your mallets. Okay, these are, I don't know if you've ever been in like Albertsons or Kmart or whatnot, you see those super pinky balls, and you wonder like, what do they do? Who does super pinky balls? Well, guys who play steel drums buy all the super pinky balls. Okay, why? Because they go on the ends of those sticks, they go on the floors of the, well, we don't have any here, but we do have some drums at school that have super pinky balls as the bottoms of the feet because you want the drum to suspend and resonate and not sit on a hard surface. So the sticks can vary, but traditionally as the pitch goes lower, the mallet becomes larger because of the fundamental base. Okay. Well, if you'd like to have any other questions, if you want to come up, we do have these CDs that the band put out in the spring of '99. We'd love to give you one for just $13. And also, if you'd like to take a look at these drums, or if you have any other questions, please feel free. But again, I want to thank our sponsors again, Pearl and Zildjian and Innovative. When I called Pearl and Innovative, I said I'm doing a steel drum clinic, and they were like, well, how does that work for me? I'm like, well, I'm bringing marimbas and drums, so no, we really appreciate their help, and of course the College of Music and our support there. So this is Pan in A minor. This is a panorama chart. It is the original. It was written with a variety of editors and transcribers. As you can see, one of those for this chart is Mr. Nate Huba, back there in the back. Nate basically adapted the chart that Panyard offers to fit this band. And this is about a 10 to 11 minute composition, but it's multifaceted, and we hope you enjoy it. And thank you again for coming. This is Pan in A minor. Thank you so much. Jeremy Gomez on the drum set back there. Also, we're playing at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon down in the showcase area to a slightly bigger room. So if you'd like to bring your friends, we'll be playing again at 2 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you so much. Okay.
Oh, they're getting pictures.
Hey, Jeannie, picture time. Okay.
Yeah, I've hung out with your son a lot and no one below.
Yeah.
3 people in our region are always there. So they usually hang out with these groups.
Selling Romano and other percussion companies. St. John,
Only you didn't like it, so we changed it like you liked it. I guess other people like it too. I'd love to. We sang some songs for our string our fall concert. We had some steel drum play. Like one, I mean, there's like 3 steel drum players listening pieces and like.
So did you have the big steel drum come and play?
That was my fall concert. We sang some like Caribbean style kind of stuff.
We try to pull them out of their shells a little.
This is the UNT Steel Band. This is Pen and A minor, a panorama chart. And it's been great to play for you yesterday and today, and we want to thank you again. So this is the UNT Steel Band with Pen and A minor.
it, is it?
That's it.
Oh, man.